Well, good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome on behalf of Milim to this evening's presentation. Welcome to you wherever you are in the UK and as ever, wherever you are in the world. Our series of talks and conversations continues with our guest, Paul A. Mendelson, and I'll introduce Paul to you in just a moment. A little bit of housekeeping first. Please do ask questions. You do this by typing whatever you'd like to ask into the Q&A facility on your screen. And as ever, we'll try our best to get through as many of your questions as we can. There's also a chat facility on your screen, and that will allow you to send a message to all of the other participants on this webinar, should you wish to do so. Finally, we are recording this event. You'll find it in the next day or so on our website at milim.org.uk. There you will find recordings of other past events, as well as details of our program for which you can book tickets. And so to our guest, Paul Mendelson is an author and a scriptwriter for television, film and radio, covering comedy, drama, adventure and science fiction. His career began as a lawyer, having gained a first-class honours degree from Cambridge University, but he didn't spend long practicing law, soon to become an advertising copywriter for Ogilvy and Mather. It was while working as a creative director for a London advertising agency that he began writing his first TV series. That series, the BBC comedy May to December, ran for 39 episodes and was nominated for a BAFTA Best Comedy. If you look carefully just behind Paul, you'll see that nomination on his wall. He then created and wrote the BBC series So Haunt Me and then My Hero, before writing the much acclaimed play Losing It, starring Martin Clunes. He's also co-creator of Neighbours from Hell for DreamWorks. This book, The Forever Moment, is his 8th. All have been scripted, with 3 optioned for film. Paul was last a guest for Milim back in March of 2019, and what a different world it was then. And it's a great pleasure to welcome him back. Paul, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
So let's talk about this new book for a while, and then we can open up the discussion and talk a bit more about writing and your writing in general terms. For those who haven't read The Forever Moment, and it is a really good read, I'm recommending it. What's it about?
Well, the inspiration, funnily enough, I don't know whether you remember, a couple of years ago on Netflix, there was a series called The Queen's Gambit, which was a series about chess. And I was watching it with my wife, and it was set in the mid-1960s in Lexington, Kentucky. And one of the scenes was when the girl goes to play a chess championship, the first one, the Kentucky Championships. And she goes to a high school called the Henry Clay High School in Lexington, Kentucky. And I turned to my wife and I said, I went to that school. Because when I was 16, I went on an exchange tour from my school in Glasgow, the Glasgow High School. I went on an exchange tour with some other Scottish kids to Lexington, Kentucky. And because my parents wanted me to stay with a Jewish family, I stayed with a doctor who was at the Veterans Administration Hospital for military personnel who had psychological disorders, where everybody else was at a normal home, and I was in a hospital for people with mental disorders. I remember on the first day I came downstairs, and the lady of the house said, "How do you like your bacon, Paul?" So I thought, oh, it's a good choice of my parents. But it was lovely. It was a fantastic experience. And I suddenly thought, and I think the title of this talk is "What If?" I thought, well, what if I had had a relationship with a young lady there, and what if years later I discovered that the relationship would be more productive than I had possibly realized that it was, and what it's like meeting somebody that you're in love with when you were 17, when you're now nearly 40, and your lives have totally changed. How would that be to connect again? So it's in a sense a romantic comedy, but spanning two different generations, which I thought was really quite interesting. And strange enough that the reason he comes back to Lexington, Kentucky, because he's on a book tour, because he's become a writer. So I was able to put a lot of my own stuff in about what it's like to be a writer and how you live in your head and how you think in terms of stories. So it was all about that, and it's serious, but it's also funny, which is what I like to do, is to make combine a lot of different emotions together, so people have hopefully a good and exciting read. I mean, it's my books, I think, are exciting, but they're not violent. Nobody dies, but except that what the couple was set in an old age home for entertainers, their exits and their entrances, and then a couple of people died, but of natural causes. But there is still drama and tension in life, without having to go into crime and dead bodies.
Well, I think there's a few things we can pick up on here, and the book certainly is a page turner, which maybe we'll talk about
thank you.
In a few moments. The hero is called Charles Dickens, and again, we need to come back to that, because I think that's quite an interesting choice of name. But there's a lot about Charles Dickens that seems to mirror your story. You know, not only did you go to the school, but Dickens works in law briefly, and then he's a copywriter, and then he's an author. And it seems that it's a highly autobiographical character, and yet you're quite clear that many other elements of the book are pure imagination. So
yes, I think I have to reassure my wife on that point, because of what happens over. If I had to say, he's called Charles Dickens because he's half Jewish, and his father's parents, when they came over, chose an English name converted from a more Jewish name, and his parents, for reasons best known to themselves, decided to call him Charlie, which is why he uses a pen name for his books, and which is why the girl doesn't recognize, when she goes to the book signing, she doesn't realize it's going to be the guy that she once knew rather intimately over 20 years ago. So there was a point to having that particular name, and it also lends itself to a lot of other stuff. But yes, as I say, everything is a bit autobiographical. Maybe this is more autobiographical than most, because he is a writer and he was a lawyer and he went into advertising, and you know, you use the tools that you've got. I'm not a great researcher, but I can just about remember my own life, and so I can plow that.
And using the name Charles Dickens, clearly, I mean, he's one of the best known authors of all time. Was there something of an homage to Dickens? Does Dickens have a special place in your life?
Not particularly. I mean, I don't think that the thing is. I think it was a useful device because of the being half Jewish and changing the name, and giving him a reason why he didn't put that name on as his writer's name, which was very important. Otherwise, the game would be given away quite early on. But also, it lends itself to other things. As people read the book, we'll see that there are other things which spin off it. But obviously, yes, I mean, Charles, any writer would owe things to Charles Dickens, because he's our youth. He's what we read, and he was a page turner, and he wrote for a living, which is what I've always done. And sometimes it's been penury, and sometimes it's been terrific, and that's the life of a writer.
Now, one of the things, I mean, you've just told me now that you went to stay with a Jewish family, and yet the family you've cast in the book are not Jewish.
No,
although they sound quite Jewish.
I think probably all my characters sound quite. So, when I have to say, when I wrote May to December, this is just by the way, when I wrote May to December, the actors said to me, and it wasn't until almost we'd finished the series, they said, you know, we love doing this show because you've written a cake eating scene into every single episode. In every single episode, there are people sitting around having cake, even though that wasn't really a desperate reflection of English society. It was a reflection of my society, that you had coffee and cake. Only once a director who hadn't been on the series before, he said, what are they doing here? So I said, well, having coffee and cake. He said, can we change it to to having a drink. So I said, okay. So I put coffee and cake in somewhere else. So there was always cake. So I think everything I write somehow comes from a Jewish place, even if the characters aren't Jewish. It's because it's who I am. It's my life.
Now, I read that you'd hoped initially that this story would be a film, and what happened? Why did it not become a film?
No, it isn't. It's no. I hope all my stories will become films. I mean, the first book that I wrote, In the Matter of Isabel, was bought by Hollywood within a week. I mean, we had a cast and everything, and then the producers fell out, so no, because I'm a script writer. Sometimes I write the scripts first, and because it interestingly with this, The Forever Moment, I started writing it as a book, and it wouldn't come. So I thought, rather than forcing it, I'll write a script, because that gives me the characters, it gives me the dialogue, it gives me the scenes. And so I wrote it as a script. Then I wrote the book after that. And then I went back to the script with what I'd learned writing the book. But the books don't read, I hope the books don't read like glorified film scripts. I mean, they're written as books. But I think cinematically, because it's how I was trained. I think in scenes, I think in pictures, which is why people, interestingly, when they've read books, I wrote one called A Meeting in Seville, and all set in Seville during Semana Santa. And people who read it said, well, from the descriptions, they could see it because I was setting a scene. That's what I do.
Well, certainly you get a real flavor of the different parts of America these characters travel through. I mean, there's certainly places I've not been, but you get a very good sense of how these places are. So you've got the Dickens character who's got a lot in common with you, and you're sort of writing him from, to a great extent, your own experience. But what about the other characters? How do you create other characters? Is there a process for that? Do you sort of create a sort of character sheet with all their foibles and attributes, or do they just sort of come?
They sort of come, and they sort of speak to you. And again, you hear their voices, and you hear the rhythm and their language, and that gives me, and I think that's it's not like they're necessarily based on real people, although I'm sure they're an amalgam. I mean, in going back to the series, the first series, May to December, I made the lead character a solicitor because that's what I'd been or trained to be, and I made him Scottish because that was my background and that was my father's background. And I met the person, he fell in love with the teacher because I fell in love with the teacher, and so I knew that world. And so I suppose you do write about things and if there's somebody who does a job that you know about, or somebody is then you will adopt some of those characteristics. But I don't actually put real people I know into the books. They're an amalgam, and also I'm a comedy writer, so they have to be funny. When you're writing comedy, then you have to do three things with the characters. They have to further their plot, they have to have characters in themselves, and they have to add to the humor. And so in that sense, probably I look to the humorous element of characters without taking away from the pathos or the reality of them. I look to the play you mentioned, Losing It, was about cancer. It was about my cancer. Martin Clunes was playing me, although I think the resemblance isn't immediately obvious. And it was a very funny play, but it was about a family's reaction when a member of the family has a serious illness, and it was basically the fact that life has to carry on. And but it was also funny because it's the way I try to write, but it doesn't get rid of the pathos.
So I mean, I'm not going to spoil the ending of the book, but the book does reach a resolution, and I think as you are as you are quite deep into the book, it could go either way. It could have a happy ending or a sad ending.
Oh yeah, don't.
I'm certainly not. But or it could be left hanging. And I just wonder, you know, when you create a piece of work like this, do you feel you have to sort of resolve things one way or another for your audience? So a lot of fiction now, you finish the book and you think, what the hell, you know, what happens now?
Yeah, no, I need to resolve it. It needs. I mean, it might not be the ending that everybody wants. I mean, it's interesting that the first book, In the Matter of Isabel, it doesn't necessarily go the way people will think. But I'm thrilled with the way it did go. That was inspired by a real case that I handled as a lawyer. But I think you have to. I mean, basically, you want to leave the reader satisfied. You don't want the reader thinking, "Oh, you know, that fizzled out," or whatever. You have to, even if it's not necessarily the ending that they would prefer. It should be an ending, I think, and you know, unless it's a series or something, and they want to continue at the next time. But otherwise, I think you owe a duty to the reader that they come out thinking, "Oh, it was good, enjoyed that." I hope.
Now, I said the book was a page turner earlier on. It wasn't my words. I think it's described in one of the blurbs that's been written. In the front of the book. Do you set out to write like that, and to what extent do you need to plan the plot so that you can create these short chapters with chopping and changing and sort of I mean, this book moves in time as well as place, rapidly.
If you have an overall idea, and I think I know the way it's going to go, but sometimes when you're writing, you surprise yourself. You know, I don't want to. I mean, when I was doing TV, in the early days, I would start writing when I had a theme and see how it progressed. But then, as time went on, and more people were involved in the series, you had to write like a synopsis, almost like a scene-by-scene breakdown of the episode, which I hated. All the writers hated it because it's sterile. And everybody knows when you're writing, things happen as you're writing. But they don't happen when you're writing a synopsis, because synopsis isn't funny. But you know, and you don't put dialogue in, or it's just he did this and then they do that, and people then the executives read it and think, well, this is not very funny. So you have to say, well, it's a synopsis. What do you expect? So I think I start with a basic structure and the characters, and I let them. I mean, this sounds very facetious, you know, I know writers say this, but they do sort of talk to you in a way, and sometimes that you write something and you think, where did that come from? There's an expression that the Hollywood script writers use, and it's called, for the first draft of a script, and it's called the vomit draft. And it means you just spew it out. You write it, you get it down, and then you craft it. And my first director, who only died very recently, and it was in his 90s, who directed so many great comedies, and I was very privileged that he directed May to December. He said, don't get it right, get it written. And that's what I tell young writers, if they suffer any piece of advice, is don't get it right, get it written. Just put it down on paper, then you can work on it. Then the craft comes, and then it comes from your head. But the first thing you write sort of comes from your heart, and who knows where it comes from. It's just you just feel very privileged that it's turned up inside you.
It's an interesting thing. I find a similar thing with photography, that the first picture you take is generally the best. However many you take, the first one.
Well, we had, when myself and my art director in advertising, we had something. Obviously, we didn't tell the clients or the executives about this. We had something called the 5-minute rule, and basically we got the brief, and if we couldn't think of the idea in 5 minutes, we just forgot about it. And actually, the best ideas were the ones that came straight, you know, absolutely immediately from getting the brief. And then we worked on it, and maybe it wasn't the idea we eventually ended up with, but it was pretty good. It was better than some of the rubbish that we spent ages working on afterwards.
We're jumping about a bit here, but as you started talking about writing for television. Let's pick up on that a bit. I mean, my hero ran to 44 episodes, I think. Made to
50, 51. 51.
All right, so Wikipedia is out of date.
Oh yeah,
but Made to December, also considerable number of episodes.
Yeah, 6 years.
How do you keep coming up with ideas for such a long run? I mean, I can understand, you know, what you're saying about the inspiration for one thing, but to do it over and over and over again must be challenging.
Having a family concentrates the mind, and you know, I mean, it just needs. I mean, the first 2 series I wrote while I was a creative director in an advertising agency, and it was a nightmare. I was writing in the toilet, and people actually thought I had a stomach problem, because I'd go in there with my pad and come out about 45 minutes later, because I was, and I couldn't tell them I was to start with. I was writing a series for the BBC, because it's not what an advertising agency wants to hear, and so. Basically, I was just writing and writing and writing, and because I was so naive and so new, the ideas just came, because I wasn't constricted by what you can do, what you can't do. Then it became more difficult when I realized the exigencies of cast. We had far more people in our cast in Made to December than you would normally have in a sitcom, unless they're all in the one place, like Dad's Army. But we had some in a grocer's, and some in a shop, and some in a law office, But when it came to My Hero, we had quite a few people working on it. So I wasn't the only writer eventually. When it got so big and so popular, we had a team, you know, some very young writers who've gone on to do fantastic things. I think one of our young writers is one of the lead writers on Succession now. Another one is he's the lead writer on Not Going Out. You know, and this was just their first gig. I mean, terrific writers, and they make you look good. You know, you work with them, and it's great. But I didn't think of all those ideas on my own. I couldn't. There was too much.
How does that differ? I mean, obviously, as writing on your own, you clearly have the pressure that you've got to deliver. But of course, at the end of the day, it's your creativity entirely. As against working with a team of writers, where you know, I suppose in theory, you could actually contribute relatively little to.
Well, it's still, you're still working. Yeah, it's when you're doing a comedy, it's different from someone who's doing drama, where the writer give the script and then they're sort of not really part of the process. When you're doing comedy, you're there with the actors all the way through the rehearsals, changing things and suggesting things and new bits and pieces, and even on the day. When you're doing the dress run, so for the cameras to know their movements, you could be doing something, and even when it's being recorded, you can be in the booth and say to the director, "Can we try that another way? And could he say this line rather than that line?" And so, you know, you're constantly involved. And sometimes with the writers, with the best will in the world, they were sometimes very good at jokes, but weren't awfully good sometimes at plotting. Or character or other things. And so you'd come in and say, look, that's very funny, but they wouldn't do that. Or where does it take us in the story? Because people love story. You know, we're geared with sort of, it's in our DNA to like stories. So
how do you make something funny? Is this formulaic?
Oh, God knows.
Or is it a gift?
No. It's I think in a way it is a gift. I mean, it's because in a sense I don't think you could learn it. You can get better at it, and you can observe and see what people do. But it's a rhythm. It's dum, 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 like a rule of 3 or something like that. I mean, stand-up comics will say the same thing. That there are ways of saying things that make them funny, and there are ways of saying things where they can die on the backside. I'm sure you know people who are fun and who make you laugh, and they have a way, a rhythm, and a way of making things funny or telling it. And you see the funny side of things. So I know when I was going through my cancers, I was still at times, you know, laughing, but seeing them, it sounds strange, but seeing the funny side of things, even when things were, you know, were really rough. I think it's just in your DNA. Actually, I can't really explain it. I'm just very grateful that it's given me a career.
I remember we had Howard Jacobson as our guest
a
couple of years ago, and he was explaining how he whittles down sentences. You know, he can spend hours and hours on a single line to make it funny. Do you have the same?
Totally. Yes, totally. I mean, you don't have necessarily, when you're doing a TV script, you don't necessarily have those hours. You just go do it pretty quickly. But with my books, it's like one word can be fun. You think one word is funny. And I remember watching Mel Brooks talking with a load of writers from the Sid Caesar show, and he said 7, that's a funny number. 5, that's not so funny. And he was sort of, you know, you sort of know what will work in a given context. But I'm constantly changing words. It's a rhythm, you know. Maybe a 3-syllable word is wrong, but a 2-syllable word works. It can be as complex or as simple as that.
Now let's go back to early on in your career, and what is it about copywriting that was more attractive than the law? What made you want
everything.
Everything.
I was I think basically I wanted to write. I mean, it was a very strange thing, I would say, because it might be of interesting. When I was at Cambridge, the big law firms, now you're talking, this was about 1971, the big law firms would come around to the colleges and they'd try and recruit. And I went to interviews from the big law firm, the big London law firms. And the first question they asked was, what school did your father go to? And Queen's Park Secondary Modern in Glasgow apparently is not the right answer, and Mendelson wasn't the right surname. So I didn't get the jobs, and I ended up working for a guy who, while he was under sheriff of Westminster, held the copyright for Deep Throat for the whole of Europe, and we had mafia clients, and so I was at a very ropey firm, and I was put in charge of the family law department, knowing nothing about it, and one particular case, which in fact I've dramatized in the matter of Isabel, although I've changed it out of all recognition for obvious reason. I got too involved. I thought, I have to win this case, and the only way I can win it is to work on it full time, and you can't do that as a lawyer. And so I realized that I only wanted to work on the things that involved people. I wasn't very interested in the business and commercial side, and I realized I got too involved, basically, and I thought, this is I'm not the right temperament for it. And also I wanted to write. So really, but I suppose when you're a nice Jewish boy, if you've got no head for figures and can't stand the sight of blood, then the law is the only option. And I remember when I went up to university, he said, what made you want to do law? And I said, watching Perry Mason on the television. And the guy at Cambridge said, you'd be amazed how many people come in for just that reason. So I had a sort of romantic view of the law, which didn't really apply in practice.
But your career in advertising seems to have been more successful, as you ended up as director of creative director
of an agency. Yeah, it was. I mean, it wasn't stellar. I wasn't one of the great stars of advertising, but I did okay, and I made a living at it, and I enjoyed it. The most satisfying thing I did is I worked for some years on Don't Drink and Drive. And so you measured your success in lives saved rather than chocolate bars sold. So that was nice. But the one campaign that I did, which people wouldn't remember today, it was Heinz Spaghetti, about a little girl who had an imaginary friend called Eric, who only turned up when there was Heinz Spaghetti, and they were directed by the director Nicholas Roeg, who because a lot of film directors would do it in their spare time just to make some cash, and he directed The Man Who Fell to Earth and Don't Look Now. He was great, and I showed, and while I was working with him, I showed him a short novel I'd written, which was about a house that was haunted by a Jewish mother, and he loved it. Showed it to a producer called Verity Lambert, who was one of the first female TV producers. She started Doctor Who and Rumpold and Sweeney, among other. and she loved it, and so that was how I got into television, through the kindness of a major movie director. So it was, I owe it all to commercials, and of course the commercials were like little episodes, little comedy episodes, but 30 seconds rather than 30 minutes.
Now, two of your books are for children.
Yeah.
I remember enjoying Losing Arthur with my own son a few years back, and it actually is probably the only book he's actually read in the last few years. So,
oh, bless him.
So that's something. But how is it different to write for children as opposed to writing for adults?
Do you know, I don't consciously think I'll write for children. I think this is but then I think this is a book that obviously has that sort of audience. So how different is it? Well, obviously you've got to be, you can't, there are certain subjects that you can't really do in certain language that you avoid, either because it's not suitable or it's just difficult. But I try not to talk down to children. I've got a third one hopefully coming out in winter next year, a third children's book. I just think that, I mean, the Losing Arthur is about a little boy whose mother posts his imaginary friend to Scotland, and he's got to go find him. And the other one was The Funnies, about a state where they managed to find a way to remove the sense of humor of babies at birth, because they think that it'll make their people more malleable, and they won't be stroppy, and they won't play around, they'll just work and be docile. And the Funnies are a group of people who manage to avoid the zappers, and they try and keep humor alive and to be subversive. Oh, that adults have liked, because really it's about totalitarianism. And but for kids, it's just a romp and an exciting and funny story. So you can write on more than one level, I think, which is why adults seem to like the children's books. But I try not to talk down. I try and just tell a good story in language that kids of nine and over will enjoy.
Obviously, if you're writing a comedy for television, it's got to have the sort of jokes and the the laughs in it. The Forever Moment, I think you called it a romantic comedy, but it's a fairly serious book.
Yeah.
Although there is humor in it.
Oh yes.
Is there a deliberate approach to writing? When you set out, do you know how funny you want to make it, how serious you want to make it?
Actually, I don't know that I do. I think that it's just I tend to write in it's the manner in which I write. It's not a conscious thing, but the story dictates. Obviously, the story, like Losing It, the play, which I've actually turned into a short novel in the compendium, which is my next book. That's part of it. I've tried to work in there. The subject matter dictates that you can't be flippant about things which are serious. But even in May to December, we handled quite a lot of stuff. We handled miscarriage, and we handled fear of death, prejudice, lots of things. You can actually treat an awful lot of subjects with respect within the framework of comedy. It's really interesting, and people like it. They go with it. So I mean, the book I wrote before The Forever Moment, which is Must Have GSOH, was about a young guy with no sense of humor who thinks he's got to get one to get the girl, and so he learns to be tries to be a stand-up comic. Of course, he's useless because he's got no sense of humor. But that's got a lot of pathos in, because the young man, he's a horticultural genius, but nobody, he's patently somewhere on the spectrum, and behaves different and reacts differently to his peers, and which is interesting, and I take that seriously, but in a way he's trying to be something that he can't ever be. which is sad, but obviously ends up to his advantage rather than disadvantage, and is very funny, because there is something very funny in somebody who can't be at all funny, but there's pathos as well. So I think you can mix them both, really.
So you're somebody that's obviously had a drive to write creatively from quite a young age.
Oh yes, from childhood.
You've fulfilled that. But I just wonder if you've ever considered why part of that is making people laugh. I can understand why you want to write, but have you ever considered why you want to make people laugh, why you want to entertain in that manner?
I think it came naturally. My parents were sort of amateur entertainers, but also we moved towns. When I was 11, I was born and brought up in Newcastle, and then moved to Glasgow when I was 11, and then moved again when I was 16 to London. And I'm an only child, and I think your way in to make friends and to get a social life is to have something going for you. And I think what I had going to me is that I was quite fun. I could be funny, and so I think probably it was it was a useful tool in my armory. I'm not sporty, and so there had to be something that made groups of people who weren't suddenly thinking, oh, I hope this guy from Newcastle comes and lives. I hope this guy from Glasgow. You have to butt your way in and make yourself part of a group, and that was one of the tools. So I imagine that might have had something to do with it. I mean, I wasn't the class clown or anything like that. I wasn't. It wasn't. I didn't have to be the funniest guy in the room when I was a kid. I just had always enjoyed humor. And there's let's face it, if you look at who writes all the American comedy, they're all Jewish. I mean, it is part of our. It seems to be part of our culture to, the adversity that we've gone through and the way we've survived. I mean, I think it's in all our DNA, to be perfectly honest. Really, I don't think I'm so unusual in being quite funny and Jewish. Really, I think that to some extent it goes with the territory, and I've been fortunate that I've been able to make a career of it.
That's very interesting. I mean, certainly, yes, you're right. The American comedy writers are far more so than here, but then the comedy is very Jewish there as well.
Very
isn't it?
Jewish. Yeah. I mean, they very rarely talk about themselves as Jews within the comedy, but they patently have, but every rhythm, every bone in their body is Jewish, and all the writers, except for, let's say, something like Frasier, where the writers were gay, I think, and that was another, but again, look at a discriminated against minority group, forced by circumstance to adopt these particular characteristics. But certainly the Jews ran comedy in the States, and possibly still do. I would suspect. There was can I tell you? I don't know when my family, the series, came over here. It was the first show to be done as a team show, like they do in America. And because they weren't used to it, they had American writers leading it. And what they would do is they would go away in pairs and write a script and come back into the table where all the writers were, and they were all salaried, all the writers, which is why it's not done that much here. And they would all tear the script to shreds or create a better line. Anyway, they had a Jewish writer from New York who came over to work with them, so he knew the system. And they started. They put the script on the table. They started talking about it, and he shouted, "I got the line! I've got the line! I've got the line! I've got the line!" So all the other writers, being English and polite, immediately stopped talking and said to the guy, the Jewish writer from New York, "Tell us the line." And he said, "Oh, I haven't thought of it yet. But in America, by the time the others have shut up, I'll have thought of the line." And so he had to get it. That's the difference.
How interesting. Now, a lot of your work, and indeed the theme of tonight's conversation, is what if. You know, certainly the forever moment is a what if. What if you'd met? What if you'd met a young lady on that trip? And I think that's another theme of your writing as well. So not only is it comedy, but there's also this wild imagination of what might have happened. Which I think runs through quite a lot of your work.
Well, I'll tell you one of the best examples of that. When we got married, we went to Madrid, and then somebody said, this is what, 1974. Somebody said, you must go to Seville. It's Semana Santa, Holy Week. I mean, we didn't know from Holy Week. We just knew it was round about Pesach. So anyway, we went, and it was magnificent. It was, you know, floats in the street, and it was a wonderful display and very moving. And so when it was our silver wedding, my mother said, can I give you a little trip, you know, a few days away? So I said to my wife, why don't we go back to where we honeymooned in Semana Santa? It'll be exactly the same. We'll just stay at a better hotel. And which we did, and it was. And I said to Mickey, I said, wouldn't it be amazing? Well, this is the what if thing. So what if we met our younger honeymooning selves here? And she just rolled her eyes. And so I know when she does that, I've got a winner. So I wrote it as a radio play, and then as a novel about a couple whose marriage is on the rocks. They're given as a present a second honeymoon exactly 30 years later from where they went, Semana Santa at Holy Week, and they meet their younger selves there. The younger selves are still in their era, and they're in their own era, but of course everything looks the same in Semana Santa and Seville, so nothing changes except maybe the size of the cameras and the phones. So and the younger selves don't recognize the older ones, but the older ones recognize the younger ones, and they think, is there some way that we can make our marriage work again? But of course, be careful what you wish for. And so there was a whole plot of, you know, what if we met our younger selves here? And that's what every writer does. What, you know, when something happens, when they have something happen, they think, well, what if this happened? What if that happened? What if a dead body was found? Where, you know, I'm sure crime writers think that way, but I don't tend to think about dead bodies that much.
Now you're working on a project called Neighbours from Hell.
Oh yeah, that was. But this shows you what the careers are like. I had an idea of a family who came up from hell because I think they were, I can't remember even why, it was quite a while, they were expelled from hell and they had to live as humans, as a family. And they moved to Rickmansworth, which is just a little suburb just near us in Northwest London. But it was the people next door to them who were the neighbours from hell. They were really awful, even though they were living next door to people, demons. But it was just basically a comment on people. And I wrote it, and the BBC loved it. And then we thought, oh, this is going to go. And then I think the personnel at the BBC changed, and it suddenly didn't go. And so, but there was an actor we'd sent it to who'd loved it. He said, if nothing happens, give me a ring. I know some people. So we thought, oh, yeah, okay. Anyway, we gave this guy a ring, and he said, yeah, I was at school in Cambridge when I was a kid with a guy called Simon Wells, who was H.G. Wells' great-grandson, and went on to be a lead animator. He did for Roger Rabbit, and he directed Prince of Egypt, which was DreamWorks Animation's first movie. And he said, I'll send it to him. And he sent it to him. And he said, well, look, I'm an animation director. This is live action. But anyway, I love the idea. And the head of DreamWorks Animation was walking down the corridor one day, and he said to the one of the guys that we'd sent it to, he said, we've been asked by Fox TV to think of an animated idea. We can't think of anything. And so he said, well, what about Neighbours from Hell? But they really are from hell. He said, oh, I like that. And they gave it to the lady who was the head writer on South Park, and she made it an awful lot ruder than I'd made it. But it ran as a series on. I think you can see it now on Apple TV. I think.
So in that case, you basically created the idea and the characters. The idea.
Then they took it and ran with it. So yeah. there isn't a single word of it. I think there's characters and stuff, but it became an animated, quite a rude animated idea, whereas it was more of a family comedy. But we were, myself and another guy were credited as in tiny little print at the end. At the end of it, but it was actually our idea, and you know, they bought it from us, which was nice, and we went over for a week and met all the DreamWorks animation people in LA. So that was good, and it was nice to have an American credit, something that had been made for American television. So that was good.
Now, I was looking at your Twitter accounts, and a couple of weeks ago you posted. Began working life as a lawyer, average UK salary, 60k, quit to be a copywriter, average UK salary, 40k, left to right, TV comedy, average UK salary, 30k, decided to write novels, average UK salary, 4k, and some free copies. Yeah. Follow me for more career advice.
You know, I got so many likes on LinkedIn and Facebook for that. I just thought it was quite funny, because I'd sort of, I mean, you know, part of it was facetious, because I did very well from TV comedy, but you know, I do look at friends who were major city lawyers, and I haven't done nearly as well as they have, but maybe I've had a bit more fun. I don't know, but I would have been a really rubbish lawyer, and I was okay as a comedy writer. But now writing books, I mean, I don't know how people, you know, I mean, I'm hoping that they'll be bought for films, because I haven't made a fortune from books, but I just love writing books. But it's with a few notable exceptions. I you know, it's not the way to great things, I think, to be a romantic comedy novelist. But
well, I think in a sense to achieve what you've achieved is also quite difficult to attain for most writers.
With the BBC. Yeah. I was you know, I wrote the first episode in May to December. The head of comedy said, "Love this. Maybe it's a fluke. Write a second episode just to see if it you know, if it isn't." So I wrote the second episode. Is yes, let's go to series. Who would you like in it? I said, "I'd like Anton Rogers. I think it'd be really good." He said, "Okay." I mean, now that's unheard of. It would it would go through 96 channels. It would be researched. You know, there's no way that that I could have managed that. A first-time writer doesn't get a series. You know, they may get an episode or something, they may get something here, but to have the first thing on TV that you ever write is a series that runs for 6 years. You know, it gets 15 million viewers. That couldn't be done. I was very, very lucky, very, very fortunate, and I met people who were kind enough to have faith in me and to show things to the right people. So I've learned from that you sort of pay it forward in a way.
Mm-hmm. Now, you were talking earlier about cancer and how your experience had influenced the Martin Clunes film. Other than influencing your work, has that changed any other aspects of your life, your attitudes, your sort of way of thinking?
Well, yeah. Well, I had testicular cancer in 1989. Then by the time I managed to get the film made, I had prostate cancer. So I you know, I said we could do a series. You could do losing more of it, you know, losing a lot. But they did. It was. They decided to keep it as a one-off, or it was literally a one-off. I lost a testicle, but so it must influence you if you have things like that happen to you. Really,
we have a question from Pessy Kraus, who's watching in Jerusalem. And she said, "Could you give an example of how you make your cancer funny?"
Oh, well, there's one line. There's one line, because he's got a major advertising campaign that he finds he has to, which could be make or break in his career. At the same time as he learns that he has testicular cancer, and he says to the specialist, he says, this has come at a really bad time for me. And the specialist said, can you tell me a good time for having your scrotum examined? And so that's basically the sort of thing. And that line was taken up by the British Medical Journal. They actually, when they gave it a terrific review for the thing, they actually said that line, you know, please tell, one day I'd like to hear somebody tell me a good time for having a scrotum exam. So that's it. It's just that, you know, people can have an exchange of conversation, which is amusing. And but at the same time, within the play, what I did was I had fake commercials of like a family, happy advertising family, but he's in it with his children, being really happy, but talking about, you know, laughing about what's going to happen to him, to just show the ridiculousness of it compared to the reality of what really goes on in a life. So there was no way I trivialized the cancer, because the whole thing was how it affects a family. And the last thing, basically, the blow up scene was when the daughter turns to him and says, "It's not just your effing cancer, you know." And he discovers how his family had been pussyfooting around him while trying to, you know, not say how they were feeling about it, until it all came to a head. So it's difficult to describe, but it was, I mean, it wasn't like people were holding their sides laughing. But on an interesting side, men, because we had letters, while they were watching that piece of television, were actually self-examining themselves, and quite a few found lumps in their testicle.
How interesting! And
isn't that extraordinary? That's the power of
That's
the power of television. They actually, because they wrote to the BBC and said, "Thank you very much. We've actually discovered that we've got testicular cancer."
But this mirrors what you were saying about the drink driving campaign early in your career, that one way or another you've managed to actually save lives through the work you're doing.
Well, I mean, hopefully. I mean, isn't that a nice side effect from a plan? I didn't do it for that reason. But, I mean, interestingly, the Tavistock used the play to train family therapists. Because a fellow head of comedy at the BBC, his wife, his partner, worked at the Tavistock at the time, and she said yes, they took that up because that was a good example to show what happens in a family. Because it really wasn't about will he live or will he die. It was much more about how a serious illness affects a family. All I can say was that, you know, people did laugh, and they also were moved. So it seemed to work, hopefully.
Now we are seeing at the moment a rise of AI, particularly in copywriting, but also in creative writing. And I wondered, as a writer, whether that worries you, whether it.
I don't. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I don't. I think actors, are worried about it, because I think the whole thing in the States is they could take a piece of film of an actor, pay him for that, and use him as background in 900 other movies, and that's what they're concerned about. I think it would be pretty hard to get artificial intelligence to do what I do, particularly. Maybe they can work out jokes in individual jokes, but character and plot and that, I think that so I can't say that's high on my list of worries. And also, you know, it's not going to happen probably in my time anyway. Who knows what will happen in my kids and my grandkids' time? But that's the worry. So
what's next? Are you working on books?
I'm working on the next book is called Any Length to Please, and it's basically, I hadn't seen it done before. It's a short story, a novella, a novel, and a little what I call a literary confection at the end. It's basically making something about the different lengths and the different things you can do in different stories. The first short story is like a romance, like a what if romance. The second is actually a novella, which is based on the testicular cancer. The third is a novel, but it's a fable. It's quite an outrageous sort of fantasy, and then the fourth one is a very short story but told in letters. And so I thought that was interesting. And then I've got a new children's book coming out, which called Henry the Half-Time Hero, which is I think it was an idea that came to me when I was doing my hero, about what if you're the product of a superhero and a normal mum. So you've got superpowers, but they only come on very spasmodically, and you never know when. And and you don't know whether you're one thing or the other, and you have to live in secrecy because of your dad's job. And it lent itself to a lot of fun and some quite serious, interesting stuff for a kids thing. So that's what I'm working on at the moment.
Sounds fascinating. Well, we'll watch with interest for those.
Oh, please.
If you want to buy this book, we'll try and put a link on the follow-up email tomorrow. It really is an entertaining read. Really a joy actually. And
thank you. Can I say, Jonathan, one thing, because it gets is my writing name is Paul A. Mendelson, because bizarrely there is a Paul Mendelson who I know who's a crime writer, and he's very good, but he's not me. So, and we get confused all the time, but my books are by Paul A. Mendelson, and they're the ones where nobody gets killed.
And I think you have to put the full stop after A on Amazon, otherwise it
doesn't. Oh, probably. Well, they get us mixed. Yeah, they get it. Oh, maybe that's what the problem is. But they get us mixed up. But I mean, good luck to him too. He's a nice guy, but he's not me.
Then I was at school with another Paul Mendelson, who's a pharmacist. So there.
Oh, really?
There are a few.
There's a few.
Slightly different spelling. But,
yeah.
Anyway, to say thank you, it's been a joy to chat with you. To say thank you, I'm going to send you a copy of this. This is some of my photographs of Israeli artists, which I hope you'll enjoy.
Oh, thank you.
Wing its way to you in the next few days. Now,
Jonathan, thank you.
A pleasure. Now, let me just tell our audience a little bit about what's coming up. We've got 2 live events in September. Firstly, on Sunday the 10th. We're presenting an exciting new play called Meet Me at Cantor's, which follows the social lives of Jewish teenagers in 1950s Leeds. It's written by Anthony Clavane and Mike Levy, and I'll be chatting to them both online on Monday, the 4th of September. You can book for this on our website too. For viewers outside of Leeds who are not able to attend, we will be recording the play and we will make that available in due course. Then on Wednesday the 13th, we present the other live event with Lord Daniel Finkelstein. I'll be chatting to him about his recent book, Hitler, Stalin, Mum and Dad. And that will be at the Grammar School at Leeds. Tickets from our website. So milim.org.uk for information about those. You can also sign up to our newsletter and make sure you don't miss anything. All of our online events are free. Live events do incur a modest ticket fee, but either way, you can make a donation to help with our costs. There's a link in the chat or visit our website. So it remains for me to thank our guest, Paul A. Mendelson, once again. Thank you so much, Paul. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, thank you. It's been great. I loved it.
And looking forward to seeing you all at a future event. Until then, stay safe. See you soon.